Welcome to the Solid Verbal. Now would be a perfect time to consider subscribing. Yeah, that little subscribe button for year-round premium college football content. That's it. Here's the video. Enjoy. Subscribe.
Welcome back to the Solid Verbal, boys and girls. My name is Ty Hildenbrandt. Dan Rubenstein's in California right now. So you're stuck with me today, but I've got a special guest. Going to talk with our friend Pete Sampson of The Athletic. It has been a very active offseason for all things Notre Dame. I want to talk to him about Tommy Rees. I want to talk to him about Sam Hartman, about new coaches, about this ongoing conference realignment discussion that we continue to have, if only because we have to. So stay tuned for that. That'll come up here in just a few moments. Head on out to verballers.com if you want to help support the podcast. It's the best way to do so. Sign up to be a premium or certified Verballer. You get access to our Discord. If nothing more, make sure you go on out to YouTube, subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit subscribe on whatever podcasting app of choice is yours. We'd love to have you with us all off season long. We do 2 public episodes per week. We also offer the bonus stuff on our Patreon. Dan will be back next week. In the meantime, let's just jump right in. Let's talk to our friend Pete Sampson of The Athletic. All right, joining me now, longtime friend of the Verbal. You know him from The Athletic. You know him from the Shamrock Podcast. You know him as Pete Sampson. Sir, how you doing?
Good. You sort of enjoying a slow off season for the last 48 hours because the rest of it has been a little bit nuts around here. But yeah, spring practice it's hard to believe it's 2 weeks away. And we've yet to talk to Sam Hartman, which is sort of like the big thing here. So very interested to do that this week.
Was there ever a moment in time where you were concerned that Sam Hartman might leave too?
Yes. Because, I mean, these grad transfers are such business decisions, right? Like, I don't think there's a lot of grad transfers that are coming to play for Our Lady on the Dome or, spend some time at the grotto. It's, how do I get in better position to make it at the NFL? And, say what you want about Tommy Rees. It's a very pro-style approach. It's sophisticated offense, and that's what Hartman was looking for. So, I think even in Gerad Parker, the new offensive coordinator's introduction, he acknowledged, I think he used the word anxiety with Sam Hartman and getting with him and sort of explaining, okay, here's what we're going to do. And Marcus Freeman's talking about pro style. But yeah, it's like Sam Hartman came here as a business decision, and then the reason of that business headed to Alabama. So I think getting that settled, and we'll talk to Hartman for the first time on Wednesday of this week. That's significant.
What questions do you have for him?
Well, I mean, how he processed Rees's departure. The reason he came to Notre Dame left. So how do you sort of view the experience here and how it's changed after essentially 2 months? That's the biggest one. And then, sort of why he decided to do the 6 year at all. It's my understanding he was sort of a late round draft pick, as is. How much can that improve coming to Notre Dame? What does he want to improve coming to Notre Dame? And then I think just sort of what his expectations are for this offense here and what he could do in it. I mean, he's put up ridiculous numbers at Wake Forest, but he's never had an offensive line quite like the one he's going to play behind at Notre Dame. How does that sort of factor into where he wants to be and how coming to Notre Dame can help him from an NFL point of view?
Pete, do you have any sense for the chronology of events with respect to Hartman coming to Notre Dame? Because oftentimes, right, when we hear about a player throwing his name in the transfer portal, we're the last to know. There's been a lot going on behind the scenes, as you just said. Tommy Rees may be the reason that Hartman came to ND to start. What did that process look like?
Well, I mean, I think that they were sort of kicking the tires on that from very third-party points of view for a while. It's not. I always say it's sort of like rounders. If you can't spot the sucker at the table in the first 10 minutes, you're the sucker. Like if a kid enters the transfer portal and you don't know where he's going, you're the sucker. He's not coming to you. So you got to do your legwork ahead of time on that and be prepared for this stuff. There's a tangential relationship there where, Bill Rees, who was Tommy's dad, who was in scouting at Notre Dame, was actually at Wake Forest when they recruited Sam Hartman. So it's not it's not like they didn't know what they would be getting into there from the get-go. But I think there was a lot of consternation around Notre Dame about NIL. How is this going to factor into it? Is it going to work against Notre Dame? Whether that be Florida was a possibility that was sort of rumored for Sam Hartman. And I don't have a great understanding of what the NIL opportunities are for Hartman at Notre Dame, other than just to say that the quarterback at Notre Dame is a very lucrative position, and I think that he'll monetize that because it would be hard not to. But I think for most of it, Hartman was looking for a bigger stage that most importantly was going to turn him into a better pro prospect. So that's sort of where like the biggest question is like, okay, well, is Notre Dame still the place that's going to turn you into a better pro prospect? That's one of Marcus Freeman and Gerad Parker's big points to convince Hartman about. And I think that's where spring practice is significant in a different way for Notre Dame, because Hartman's going to have to. You're going to want to prove it to him a little bit that, we're pushing your game forward in an NFL developmental kind of way.
I will say I was very reassured after the news broke from you and others about Tommy Rees going to Alabama. I think it was that Friday night Sam Hartman posted a video on his Twitter of him working late, Friday night, weight room. It felt to me like that is not something you post if you are planning on leaving and going elsewhere. So obviously things can change very quickly in college football, but at least for the moment, I feel somewhat confident that we're in a good place.
Yeah, I think that's if he has a good experience in spring practice. I know he's had a good experience just sort of like being at Notre Dame and the culture of the program, and just like the guys here are like the guys probably he was with at Wake Forest. Like that's a positive. So all signs point to like this will work out just fine. But there is always that flicker of like, college football is a very drunk sport. Anything can happen at any time. You never want to rule anything out. But I think that overwhelmingly stuff is in a good spot with Hartman and Notre Dame the longer this goes on. And that once spring practice starts in a couple of weeks, I think it will further kind of strengthen Notre Dame's position and Hartman's relationships here.
I was hoping you could help us unpack the whole Rees thing, if that's okay. I'm sure you've probably grown a little bit tired of talking about it, but after Brian Kelly left, the partnership between Marcus Freeman and Tommy Rees was something that I think was very easy to get behind, right? Even people who didn't like Notre Dame found that easy to root for. There was, I think, from a Notre Dame fan's perspective, a sense of continuity that was reassuring about that setup. The season played out. I think we can debate the merits of what went right, what went wrong, but I was hoping you could give us some insight into what was that relationship like between Freeman and Rees?
I mean, my understanding talking to sources very close to both of them is that they had a good relationship, that it wasn't, I think it was portrayed as an arranged marriage sort of after the fact. I don't think it was ever that way. Like if Marcus Freeman could have gone back and hired any offensive coordinator a year ago, I think he would have hired Tommy Rees. So
right.
That sort of retention made perfect sense. I think from a professional development standpoint, it made a lot of sense for Rees, where he had more autonomy to a point. When it came to filling out the staff, I think Rees probably expected to be able to pick and choose who he had in different spots, and Freeman sort of put his foot down on Gerad Parker as the tight ends coach. So that was a point of like, all right, we're not co-head coaches here. I'm not the head coach of offense. I'm the offensive coordinator. Marcus Freeman is the head coach. What he says goes. So that took a little bit of an adjustment, because I think Rees thought when the job came open that he would be like, not maybe a serious candidate, but like more than a token, like, hey, we'll talk to you and just see what your thoughts are on this. And I think it got to a point, like Rees is a big professional development guy. And when he flirted a little bit with Mario Cristobal at Miami a year ago, that, when that job went to Josh Gaddis, it was purely for a professional development standpoint. He's very well compensated by Notre Dame. But how do you push your career further forward? I think working for a first-year head coach, you could make an argument that like the professional development angle there is like not a selling point. However, having the autonomy to just sort of run the offense you see fit without Brian Kelly sort of looking over your shoulder, that was a positive to stay. And then ultimately get to a point where like which head coach in college football runs the best finishing school for a coach? I mean, it's Nick Saban 100 times out of 100.
That's right.
Maybe
That's
you
right.
could say it's Kirby Smart just because he is Nick Saban, just the younger version. So I think that ultimately that opportunity for Rees to kind of leave the Notre Dame nest and just sort of like, all right, you don't get the benefit of the doubt in Tuscaloosa like you did around South Bend a lot of times. That ultimately sort of got him to a point where it's like, okay, I need to do something else. But more importantly, if I do something else, it needs to be with somebody like Nick Saban or Kirby Smart. Like those are the places I need to go because that, opens the door. Like, do you want to go to the NFL? Nick Saban's a great person to learn from. Do you want to be a college head coach? Same deal. So that's, I think, also, I don't think there was any like, I'm getting away from Marcus Freeman. I think they have a good relationship. They're like working together. But for Rees, it's always about professional development first and foremost. And Nick Saban offers that at the highest level.
Yeah, I don't think anybody can fault Rees for taking that job. As he said, it's a clear step up. It puts him on a rocket ship for a big job probably within the next 5 years, and he's still a really young coach. I like what he did at Notre Dame. I think he was very good at maximizing several of the parts of that offense, but I don't know if he ever fully optimized the whole thing. Like nobody's going to look at Notre Dame's offense over the last couple of years and say, wow, that was a machine, right? That didn't happen. And, if you read the internet, there are reasons for that per the internet. They range from Notre Dame not having enough talent to Tommy Rees is overrated. Where are you on that spectrum?
Well, I mean, they didn't have enough talent at receiver. There were times where they didn't have enough talent at quarterback, but ultimately that's the fault of the offensive coordinator, who is Tommy Rees. So those are like, it's kind of a circular argument about like, what was the problem?
Sure.
It's players, not plays. I thought Rees is like a play caller, like does it at a very high level. Nick Saban would seem to agree with that. So I feel good about my opinion there. But the reason Notre Dame had Jack Cohn and Drew Pine and inexperienced Tyler Buckner at quarterback came down to Rees. They didn't take a grad transfer in the market a year ago when they should have. Buckner wasn't ready to go in a way that he needed to be last year. They took half a season to figure out that Jack Cohn needed to get the ball out of his hands in 2 seconds or less, not 6 seconds or more. So I think Rees certainly has faults. I've written about them a bunch, but I think there is a section of the Notre Dame fan base that Rees can do no right. Maybe because he was the guy that was keeping Everett Golson on the bench 10 years ago, and they just haven't gotten over it. So he's a very polarizing figure on Notre Dame. I totally agree with you. Like his offenses were not killers. At times, the run game was, and the way they used the tight ends, I thought was creative and sort of like fit what Notre Dame wants to be, like very blue collar and smash mouth type stuff. But I do think when Notre Dame fans watch games in other leagues and they're like, holy crap, they like start at 35 points. And Notre Dame is like scratching and clawing to get there. There's got to be a different level out there. Like you can run pro style offense, and I understand the development aspect, but like these college style offenses, if that's such a thing, like Tennessee runs a college style offense, it's pretty damn effective. Notre Dame maybe moving in that direction would be a little bit healthy.
We had a really interesting debate about this point with Tommy Rees. Is this a good hire for Alabama on our Verballer Discord? And, as I said, there was a full spectrum of responses that came out. I think he deserves credit for helping build the running game this past season, knowing that every opponent knew it was coming because of Drew Pine. They knew it was coming. They knew it was either going to Michael Mayer, one of the running backs, and building that offensive line in the manner that the staff did, and then crafting a ground game around it in a way that was really effective, notably against Clemson. I think that deserves a lot of praise, but I think you said it. They didn't have a killer offense really at any point in his tenure at Notre Dame, and I'm just curious to see how that translates to Nick Saban, Alabama, and the SEC.
Yeah, because he's going to have killer talent on the outside there. He already does. Like,
no,
he won't ever start Drew Pine at Alabama. He's not going to start Jack Cohn at Alabama. They're just going to be at a higher level from the get-go. That said, Bill O'Brien has caught all sorts of crap towards the end of last year, and they're averaging like 42 points a game. And there's is Bill O'Brien is it time for him to move on? Has his offense gotten stale? And I'm just like, Notre Dame would kill for this production.
Heisman Trophy winning quarterback. Yeah. He's going to go in the top 10 of the draft. Right.
I get it. But that's Rees will have to produce at such a higher level in Alabama than he ever did at Notre Dame, just as a bare minimum. And how he handles that pressure and that scrutiny down there. Cause he definitely is, whether he reads it or he hears it, people around him read it and hear it, and it get back to him, and he knows about who's ripping them and what they're saying, and sometimes he'll clap back at you and sort of how he answers questions in press conferences. So he's gonna have to mature, I think, as a coach down there, because you can't be in Paul Feinbaum country and be worrying about what's being written on AL.com or what's being said about you on the Feinbaum show. I mean, Notre Dame was a much more comfortable ride for him in terms of criticism than anything that Alabama would be like.
On the Notre Dame side of things, by all accounts, including your own, Marcus Freeman felt that this was kind of a make or break moment for him. And it sounds as if the hire was taken extraordinarily seriously, brought in a bunch of people to help give him input on it. Some big names, of course, tied to the job. Joe Moorhead, Andy Ludwig, many others. Can you give us that timeline of events that led to Freeman ultimately promoting his guy, Gerad Parker? Yeah,
that was a fascinating process, because at the beginning you're talking to people in the agent space and around Notre Dame, and there's this may be the most important hire that Marcus Freeman makes in his time at Notre Dame, because it may determine how much time at Notre Dame he actually has.
Yeah.
And then to see him sort of hunt Colin Klein, who's not experienced, but he really liked his offense, very creative, and Andy Ludwig, who really sort of fit, multiple tight end sets, bludgeon you over the head with your offensive line and your run game. Okay, well, that fits with what Notre Dame wants to do. I was impressed he took big swings with that. Neither of them hit. The Ludwig situation was very dramatic, I should say. He comes out to
it was dramatic.
It's just this is not how it should work. You do your interviews behind closed doors, and then you announce them. They bring him to a hockey game. Everyone's well, that's a sign. This is the white smoke. It's you go to a hockey game, it's the white smoke from the papal chimney of 2023. But to see that sort of fall apart, or whether it was a buyout or a fit.
What happened there? What happened? Because there are two schools of thought, right? Either he got cold feet, or Notre Dame wasn't willing to pay the buyout. I think both sides have kind of denied.
Yeah, right. It's
both circumstances. What happened?
I've heard about 8 different sides of the story. I was told that Notre Dame didn't necessarily know the buyout figure when the interview process began. I think that they maybe believed it was a reasonable buyout, opposed to the Ludwig buyout, which is actually close to $3 million, which is absolutely insane for an offensive coordinator. I also think that Ludwig just wanted to stay at Utah. He's from Utah. His greatest success has been with Whittingham. They've got a lot coming back. That program's really humming right now. Yeah. He's got some family situations out there where being close to, being local is important. So I think it was sort of everything. But that got really hot and interesting. You don't really hear about offensive coordinator hires going that sort of sideways or publicly sideways like that. So maybe there's a lesson there for Notre Dame and a young head coach about okay, this is the way to approach that. I know Freeman wanted to sort of give Ludwig a taste of what Notre Dame was about, which is, at its best, I think Notre Dame feels like the world's biggest high school, where sports are supporting each other, and the community is sort of all into Notre Dame. So we want to give them a taste of that. In doing that, I think that set expectations that this deal was done. And then when it wasn't, sort of people got their hackles up there. So it was, getting to Gerad Parker, I think after Colin Klein and Ludwig, they just needed to make a decision. And I do think that for how good Rees was, he was not a Freeman guy. And there is value when you talk to college head coaches, there's value in having a guy you can trust 100% of the time with everything about how you communicate it, how you coach it, that you're going to be there to have their back. And Gerad Parker is definitely one of those guys for Marcus Freeman. So I can see the value in that, but that's a big change from this is maybe the biggest hire Marcus Freeman is going to make to, okay, we're going to go with somebody in-house that we can really trust and believe in. That it was definitely a weird process. Not how I think Marcus Freeman expected it to play out from the get-go.
No, a friendship forged in the fires of West Lafayette, where they carpooled to work. Like all these stories that I've read about Gerad Parker and Marcus Freeman.
That could be a fantasy things thing for you next year, by the way.
Oh,
the carpool.
yeah.
The carpool is going to be a big one.
I don't think there's any denying that. Do you feel disappointed that they went Gerad Parker?
Not really. It's like I'm surprised, but I wouldn't say I'm disappointed. It was like it's definitely a departure. The result is different than what I thought the process was going to lead to. I thought the process was going to lead to Notre Dame hiring an experienced offensive coordinator with a track record of quarterback development, and it didn't. It led to a guy with some experience as an offensive coordinator who doesn't coach quarterbacks. But I could see where Freeman's head is at. If you're like, okay, you go Parker as offensive coordinator, Gino Guidugli, who is another Freeman guy who does have some offensive coordinator experience. Joe Rudolph is offensive line coach. Their coach Harry Heaston, Freeman and Rudolph go back to Ohio State together. So it's like I understand how the pieces fit together. It's just not the puzzle I thought Freeman was working on when the process started.
What does the Parker / Guidugli, because I presume he'll have some input into it, what does that offense look like? Is it a modified version of what we've seen over the last couple of years with Rees? Will there be will it go in a different direction altogether? What's your sense?
I think that it will be similar to how Rees ran it in terms of it will be a run first approach. That's where it's going to start for Notre Dame. I don't think they're ever going to air it out like I referenced Tennessee. Like Notre Dame's not going to have 4 receivers outside the numbers every play. But it needs to have more of a vertical pass game threat. The quarterback upgrade should help that. The receivers should be better than they were last year when there just was not much of a connection between, I think, Pine, Buckner, and what Notre Dame had at receivers. And they were not overly talented at that position last year either. So it has to have more options than a world-beating tight end and elite offensive line. Their offensive line should still be very good. Their running backs are great. But they got to push the ball vertically in a way they couldn't last year. So I think that's not like a change in offensive scheme. It's just like your players are better at those positions. Like if Rees was still the offensive coordinator, I think this would have been his best offense at Notre Dame by far. And so I think Gerad Parker in a lot of ways is set up for success because of the players he'll be sort of putting into various pieces. But Sam Hartman is obviously the biggest of that group.
I'm interested on what that puzzle looks like on the quarterback side of things. You listen to our show, Pete. I've been talking about the quarterback spot at Notre Dame for as long as I've had a show. You have been covering Notre Dame longer than just about anybody, so you understand the questions around quarterback. As you said, it is a prestigious spot. It does not feel like a spot where they've had a whole lot of transcendent talent over the last 15 to 20 years. They've had guys come through there, but Sam Hartman now, I think, represents a moment of real optimism for where the offense can go. We had a question on our Verballer Discord from someone I know, Catherine B., who is revered on our Verballer Discord as well as the athletic comment section. But her question is specifically around CJ Carr, the big commit that they've got in the class of 2024. But I will broaden it a little bit and ask, what does that pathway look like from your standpoint at the quarterback position? Because Sam Hartman's one and done, and they did take Kenny Minchie, I believe their recruit that came in as part of the 23 class, CJ Carr coming in with 24. Tyler Buckner is still there at time of recording. How does that quarterback roadmap appear to you as we record this in early March 2023?
I think it's muddled, which is fine. I think one of the things I want to see Notre Dame do that they didn't do last year is be more aggressive and cutthroat with how they handle that position. I think they've had much more of like, we have a good culture in our room, and like we're sort of it's a developmental program, and like no. Find the best guy and play him. And I'm not saying that Ian Book wasn't the best guy because he won 30 freaking games for Notre Dame, but
sure.
There have been times over the last few years where I think Notre Dame has sort of deferred to like having good vibes in their quarterback room and not been as cutthroat with competition as they need to be. I think taking Sam Hartman is a cutthroat move because you lost Drew Pine, you risk losing Tyler Buckner. But you know what? That's fine because you're upgrading the position. And then a year from now, you'll have Buckner, Carr, Minchie, Steve Angeli if he's still here. Somebody's going to win the job. It doesn't matter if it's Carr or Buckner or Minchie or Angeli. Two of them will probably leave. And I think Notre Dame has to be like, well, that's fine. Then we'll just go get another transfer. I think one of the things you see other programs do is they go out and try to find a dude every year at quarterback. And I think Notre Dame's sort of been like every other, which is just like not good enough when you're banking on you're essentially hoping you have a 100% hit rate, because when you don't, then you have this huge gap in your roster of quarterback talent. I think Notre Dame needs to be more aggressive in recruiting and more willing to take transfers at that position to cover up cracks if they exist, and spend less time thinking about like, okay, everyone's in a happy camp mood here in this room. Just like, no, this is the most important position on the team. Be cutthroat about who you can get in there and be recruiting your butt off at all times to make sure you're getting a top 200 level quarterback every cycle.
It will be interesting to see how the Hartman experiment goes, because if he is able to elevate his draft stock in a meaningful way, that tends to help other potential transfers with any discomfort they might have about coming to South Bend.
I agree. I think Jack Cohn's experience was good. It's not like he turned him into an NFL draft pick.
XFL quarterback.
Starting XFL quarterback. He did throw a touchdown to Ali Z Mack if you're
that's right.
If you're a deep dive on Notre Dame former tight ends. But he had a good experience here. I think Sam Hartman has a chance to have a great experience here. I don't think that you want to just have Notre Dame's quarterback room be like you're starting a grad transfer every year, but you at least want whoever next year's Sam Hartman is to look at Notre Dame and be like, oh, okay, well, he had a good experience there, and maybe that's a spot I should look at. Maybe it's next year's Devin Leary or next year's Brendan Armstrong. Who knows? Like, quarterbacks are moving all the time. So it's important for like branding of the program to be like, you can come in here and play right away. This is a big stage. Everyone's going to know who you are on a national level. Like, I think Sam Hartman was a good college football story at Wake Forest. He is one of the college football stories at Notre Dame, and that's an important thing that Notre Dame can sell and distinguish itself from other places.
You mentioned the NIL structure earlier, Pete. I haven't heard a whole lot about Notre Dame and what Notre Dame is doing in the NIL space. What is their position on NIL? How are they accommodating? How are they competing with some of what we've heard elsewhere with collectives and big money deals being thrown around to prospects and transfers alike?
So big money deals to prospects is a big no right now. Their NIL collective it's called Fund. Brady Quinn and Tom Mendoza, who endowed the business school here, sort of head that up. It's much more of like sort of the charitable works format where players are compensated for working in the community, whether it be like Boys and Girls Club or Center for the Homeless, things like that. But so there's actually, you do work to realize NIL dollars. And then if you're Michael Mayer or Kyle Hamilton, you zoom into six figures because like for-profit businesses want to work with you. Right. But in terms of the recruiting aspect of it, Notre Dame's approach is more like if you come here and you're a dude, you'll make money, opposed to you'll make money before you come here and prove anything. Notre Dame is not in the game right now to put out, I think, NIL contracts or promises to prospects just to show up. So that I don't maybe they will change with that down the road, but they've been very reluctant on that. I think Notre Dame as an institution has said like they're for NIL, and they've been like, you know, a champion or a proponent of it. And like in theory, yeah, that's true. But where NIL has gone is not where it was, I think, theoretically people at institutions thought. I think people in business knew it was going to go this way all the time. But Notre Dame's approach has been much more, you can make money here and make a lot of it if you're a player. But just to come here, we're not going to compensate you just to show up. So it's a kind of a different approach to maybe some other places.
So in like 2 years, Pete, when they have to change that policy,
yeah,
how would you envision them changing that in a way that is true to Notre Dame?
That's a tough one, because I think that there's a way to work sort of their NIL approach into recruiting where you can talk to the top prospects and say, hey, come here, here's what you'll do, here's how you can monetize that. Right now, their approach is much more, with fund at least, as like every player is compensated in the same way. It's sort of at the same figure. So whether you're the fourth team middle linebacker or the starting quarterback, that's sort of a team-wide NIL activity. I don't know how that sustains itself 2-3 years down the road when you're sort of looking at the value Sam Hartman brings to the program versus the second team long snapper, and like, wait a minute, one guy is the reason that we made the college football playoff, and that's something I think Notre Dame's going to have to adjust to over time. I think that they're aware of that. They're just trying not to sort of overstep into like a football players as university employees world. That's Notre Dame does not want to go there at all. I understand why they don't want to go there. But there are other schools that are willing to. So yeah, I think Notre Dame's this is like sort of constant reevaluation of like, what are you comfortable with in the NIL space? I do believe that Notre Dame is getting more and more comfortable with NIL, but this ain't A&M or Oregon or Miami. That's not what's happening up here, and I don't think that's ever what's going to happen up here.
Pete, we're recording this around, let's say, 10 a.m. Tuesday morning, and I saw a tweet come across from our friends over at Reddit CFB that the University of Colorado has scheduled a special executive session for Wednesday to discuss, quote, a legal advice on a specific matter, and, quote, an athletics update on the Pac-12. You are a college football fan first and foremost. You understand the climate right now with respect to the Pac-12 and media rights and how things could suddenly go boom at a moment's notice. I am not going to say that conference realignment, another round of it, is definitely going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen in college football. It feels like you need to fully qualify every statement because things change so quickly. But there is a world in which the Pac-12 disintegrates. There is a world in which Oregon and Washington end up in the Big Ten. There is a world in which, in very short order, we start talking about Notre Dame. What does Notre Dame do? How does Notre Dame fit in?
Start talking about Notre Dame.
Well, right, but continue talking about Notre Dame in maybe a more realistic way than we have in these hypothetical states that we've been in over the last decade or so. What does that ongoing conversation look like from the Notre Dame standpoint? Is it something that they have warmed to? Either because the situation around them has changed or because the money has changed? Like, what have you heard on that side?
The money has changed big time. You hear people at Notre Dame talk a lot more about the financial implications of conference full joining of the Big Ten or the SEC, like what that would look like, what that would feel like for the sort of the ability to compete with Michigan, Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia financially. That's much more of I think a front burner topic than it's ever been for Notre Dame. My personal opinion is that if Oregon and Washington join the Big Ten, Notre Dame makes sense at that point. It makes, and I mean that Notre Dame always makes sense for the Big Ten. I'm saying Notre Dame, it would be a logical decision to then join for Notre Dame because you're not joining a regional conference anymore. Like, in the early 90s, when this happened the last time and the Big Ten thought maybe Notre Dame was about to go, the East Coast was what? State College, and the West Coast was Iowa City. I mean, now it's it's the legit West Coast and the legit East Coast. There's never been a national conference quite like that. If you had Oregon and Washington, that mix, like I don't think Notre Dame would feel sort of pinned in the way that it would if it was just sort of stuck playing Thanksgiving weekend in Iowa City or Minneapolis, opposed to Los Angeles or Palo Alto. So I think there's a world where joining the Big Ten, Notre Dame would actually celebrate it, opposed to begrudgingly do it. And if the Big Ten gets a little bit more national, it's already getting more lucrative. Then I could see the day coming where that just it makes too much sense to sort of put off conference affiliation just because independence isn't important. And I understand that it is critical to the institution, but that version of the Big Ten, I think, would be very, very attractive to Notre Dame. And then, like, if you spin it forward, the Florida State Clemson discussions, where you hear their athletic directors talk about, like, this, we can't sustain this. I mean, what happens when they depart there? What does the ACC look like? Is that still a home for you if you're Notre Dame for all your other sports? I'm not so sure that it is. So it's definitely worth monitoring. But like many things at Notre Dame, they don't need to be the team that jumps first. They can wait until, like, okay, this is the perfect situation. Now we're going to make a move. I think Oregon, Washington, I don't know if you can convince the Big Ten to take Stanford as well. But if you did that, then I think Notre Dame would look at that and be like, okay, these are schools we like to associate with competitively, academically. It's a good fit.
Geographically. Yeah. I mean, look, if another shoe were to drop and the Pac-12 goes bye-bye, if Oregon and Washington go into the Big Ten in short order, which seems like it's very much on the table, at that point, the writing's on the wall. At that point, it seems inevitable that another round of more massive tectonic conference realignment is going to go down. And Notre Dame, if you're Jack Swarbrick, if you're the university president, right, this is a conversation among presidents, not so much ADs. You have to start sussing out, all right, what is our place in all this? And you know, that's got to be a conversation that goes on a regular basis, especially in today's day and age.
And I think it's worth keeping in mind, like, I realize everyone gets overheated about, like, what's next, when's this going to happen. Like, Notre Dame can be last. They can move last in this. They're not running away from anything. It's not like UCLA where it's like, oh my gosh, how are we going to meet our debt obligations? We have to join the Big Ten almost as like a cost savings measure. Like, Notre Dame can take its time. It can sort of evaluate, okay, what does the Big Ten media rights world look like? How big is that conference? What happened to the ACC? And then it can make a decision, because it's like, once you join a conference, you can't unring that bell if you're Notre Dame. So make sure it's exactly how you want it to be, because the Big Ten is never going to be like, you know what, we're full. We just took Oregon and Washington, and Notre Dame, there's just not any room for you. Like, Notre Dame is such a guaranteed moneymaker for them that they're open for business all the time for Notre Dame. So Notre Dame can sort of pick its spots if it makes sense for them to do it.
Pete Sampson of The Athletic, I got one final question for you, then we'll let you run. I know you're a busy guy these days. What are you watching for in spring camp? What are like your top 3 things that you're watching for as Notre Dame starts their spring practice?
Well, Sam Hartman for sure. I mean, that's number one.
Outside of Sam Hartman.
You got to make sure he's there. So that's important. I think that Notre Dame's defensive line is going to potentially take a pretty big step back this year. So how do they mitigate that? They took a grad transfer from Ohio State, Javonte Jean-Baptiste, which is a great name. Can he be sort of the Isaiah Foskey light? They need help up front, and I'm not sure that their recruiting class is going to be sort of an instant impact group. But how that position shakes out would be top of my list after Sam Hartman. And then the receiver group, they had 3 mid-year enrollees. Tobias Merriweather is a sophomore, or will be a sophomore in the fall, that they had big expectations for. Had 1 catch last year. It was a touchdown. They think he's got like big time number 1 receiver type ability. So that's high on my list. And then I think after that, I would say that probably the offensive line as well. I mean, Joe Alt and Blake Fisher are their 2 tackles. They're both NFL guys. But the inside of the line's going to have to be rebuilt a little bit. Zeke Correll's back at center. No Harry Heastan, no Chris Watt, who is a very popular sort of assistant offensive line coach here. He departed for the Colts. So how that gets rebuilt, those sort of the two trenches and the quarterback and the receiver, like Notre Dame should be good on both lines all the time. They should, then they definitely will on the offensive line, but can the defensive line get caught up? And then, can we see a flash? Can we just get a Kevin Austin again at wide receiver? Yeah. Somebody you're like, you throw the ball up and good things are going to happen, because they just didn't really have much of that last year outside of Michael Mayer. So that's where I'm most curious to see Notre Dame and how they look during spring ball.
Pete, where can people find you? Just as an important reminder.
Yes, many places. Theathletic.com would be the biggest, but then also my friend and colleague Matt Fortuna and I, we host our own Notre Dame podcast called The Shamrock. It's currently on a bit of a hiatus as Fortuna is on paternity leave. And then also on Twitter, if you want, if you're still into that thing, at Pete Sampson _. So many places, but The Athletic and The Shamrock, those print and podcasts, that would be the two best spots.
Very good, Pete. Thank you so much for your time. As always, we will absolutely have to connect at some point here in the near future to provide an update as the year rolls on. A lot to talk about.
Definitely. Thanks, Ty.
All right, there you go. Pete Sampson of The Athletic, of the Shamrock podcast. Go and check out all Pete has to offer, a great source for all things Notre Dame. He will be back on this show at some point in the next couple of months, if only because I'm a Notre Dame fan. I'm selfish, and it's my show. I can do that on my show. Dan will be back next week. Again, as I said at the top, spending some much-deserved time away with his family in sunny Southern California. In the meantime, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss any of our episodes. Also, going out to verballers.com. That is our Patreon. You can be a certified, you can be a premium Verballer, get access to bonus episodes, our Discord server. I am doing our weekly Brew&A this week with my mom, with Mama H. So you can send questions in. Mama H is always a very, very popular character on this show. Not just because she birthed me, but because she's Mama H. Everybody loves Mama H. So verballers.com is where you can go for more info on that. And last but certainly not least, going out to the YouTube channel. We're posting pretty much every day clips from the episode, full episodes, the works. We would encourage you to check that out and leave us feedback. In the meantime, as always, stay solid.